Well, welcome to our Unchaining Modern Slavery webinar. We're really pleased that you've been able to join us today, and we trust that the content that we have here today is both current and relevant, and most especially it's helpful to you as you lead perhaps a team of in your organisation to address the issue of modern slavery, or you're an interested individual in the public, and you want to know what it means to address this issue and ways for you to actually get involved. I'm Dr. Stephen Morse. I'm the founder of Unchained Solutions, and Unchained inspires Australian organisations to be leaders in making an impact on modern slavery. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement of country, recognising that the people are joining us from many parts, even outside Australia. And so today I'm speaking from the Wallumedegal country. And so in the spirit of reconciliation, Unchained acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So Unchained hosts these webinars with a view to advancing the conversation around the issue of modern slavery. And our purpose is to help organisations to go deeper in their implementation with the Australian Commonwealth Modern Slavery Act in particular. In other words, we want organisations to lead beyond compliance. So as well as actually attending to the various criteria of the Modern Slavery Act is to find pathways and avenues to go further and to implement processes and activities to actually make a real change and real impact. We invite you to use the chat today to ask questions, and hopefully we can at least cover some of those answers, some of those questions and answer them towards the end of the webinar. So we'll do the presentation first and the discussion, and then we'll come to the questions towards the end. If we don't have time to answer your questions in the webinar, we do promise to respond through email, and we're very happy to set up a time to meet with you to discuss any issues that you have further. Well, today I have Chris O'Reilly, who is here dialing all the way from across the ditch in New Zealand. Chris is the founder and CEO of Ask Your Team based in New Zealand. Welcome, Chris.
Good afternoon, Stephen.
So much. It's great to have you with us. Ask Your Team has been in business now for, well, almost 10 years, at least 8 years, and they have many years of success with a very strong record of delivering on their promises to help organisations build a change in culture in the way that they do business. Their focus is to help companies take a very strong stakeholder approach to assessing risk, and particularly speaking and reaching out to those people who are working at various levels of the organisation, even perhaps beyond the organisation, perhaps with suppliers, to actually see and really understand what their perspective is on their working conditions, things like pay, and how things work in terms of issues perhaps not necessarily to do with forced labour or modern slavery risk, but it could do with issues around discrimination or bullying or workplace violence or whatever it is that a company needs to do. And they can aggregate and bring all that data together to help business leaders get a better understanding of where they need to actually make improvements, where they need to remedy, and where they need to address change, and they can track that over time. So, Chris, yeah, we're really looking forward to hearing from you about Ask Your Team, and particularly how it relates and can really help organisations to verify and understand better the conditions of people working in various contexts that are associated with their organisation. So I suppose, it'd be great to hear from you, Chris, in terms of, introducing yourself, a little bit about your story and how it is that you've come to establish Ask Your Team.
Well, thanks, Stephen. The genesis of Ask Your Team is a journey that goes right back accidentally or without being consciously understood to my upbringing. Both my parents were national sports coaches. My father was a lawyer committed to children's rights. He represented New Zealand in the UN around the Charter of Children's Rights, and eventually became Commissioner for Children. So I thought it was normal in a household to have street kids, at-risk youth, single parent, teenage parents with around us. And what I saw, literally hundreds and hundreds of occasions is what people can do with a sense of belonging, with a sense of self-worth when they feel valued and respected. And I was fortunate enough to get my first CEO role at the age of 27, so that's several hundred years ago now. Went into that role in the transport industry, not knowing anything about transport, nothing about leadership, but all we did was ask questions. We got the bus drivers to talk to passengers, literally knocking on the door. What do we need to be doing differently? Involved those people in the front line, involved those people doing the jobs, and how to run the organisation. And they came up with the most amazing ideas and innovation. That organisation got the first increase in public passenger transport in almost 50 years on the back of all the ideas that came from the front line and people within the organisation. And I was fortunate enough to have other CEO roles at Citibank, running New Zealand's largest hospital, private hospital, and last corporate role was at KFC, where we had just under 3,000 staff, with staff turnover of just over 170% when I went in there. So I just about had the shortest tenure of any publicly listed CEO at the first board meeting. They said, "What business are we in?" And I said, "Well, we're either the worst recruiters or the worst people managers in the world, or probably both." So that organisation got turned around by our team, but by doing exactly the same thing, going out and asking the people in the organisation about what was going on, what was really working, what wasn't working. So that was the genesis of Ask Your Team, is how do we then take that approach, and I had about a decade as a professional director, and saw time and time again really well-intentioned leaders not understanding what was really going on and making decisions that were suboptimal. And then you talk to the people in the organisation and they would say, "Oh, we could have told you that wasn't going to work, and we can tell you how to fix it, and we can tell you how to improve it." So it was really a no-brainer to say, how do we bring technology together along with world-based research and what drives organisational effectiveness and leadership, and get people more meaningfully involved. And so that's the genesis of Ask Your Team. It's about valuing and respecting people. Leaders want to do the best job that they can, and give those leaders more information to make decisions by genuinely involving in a meaningful way, valuing and respecting their greatest asset, which is people. So we went on that journey, and about 4 years ago, one of our customers was the New Zealand apple and pear industry. That's a membership body. The horticulture industry in New Zealand relies heavily on Pacific Island migrant worker labour. And they said, "Hey, we think we're good employers, but we don't know, and we can't prove it to anyone. Would you be able to use your same system, which is anonymous, online, real-time information and involving people? Could we do that, but base the questions, rather than around organisational effectiveness, can we base it around the UNGP on human rights? Can we base it around what the requirements under the OECD? Can we base it around the International Labour Organization? And can we go to those migrant workers, those at-risk workers, and find out what's really going on?" What that does is it allows the organisations to get that rich data, those leaders, about what's really going on in the organisation, what the concerns and fears are. It allows you to identify toxic pockets of abuse and exploitation. But primarily it's all around continuous improvement. And so that was our entry into modern slavery. First time we did that, about 2,500 migrant workers were involved, and we were able to aggregate that data up and provide government and industry an overview of what was happening, but at the same time creating value for the individual organisations on how to improve their organisation, but having worker well-being absolutely at the heart of it.
Great. I mean, it sounds obvious. It sounds common sense. but it's surprising how actually asking people who are the most impacted or affected what they think seems at times to be quite remote. So seems like a foreign concept at the same time. And of course, it's the genesis really of design thinking these days, and you can spend lots of money actually doing design thinking course. So maybe you could offer that service as well about actually just asking people, the stakeholders, what from their perspective, what are the gaps, what are the problems, and to empathize in that scenario. Well, that's awesome. Thank you, Chris, for just that introduction in terms of what you do and the genesis for Ask Your Team. So I suppose when it comes to addressing the rights of employees and contractors, what are you most passionate about? Given your background, and you've said this is it's obviously part of your DNA and your history. So what is the great passion that you have in this space?
We're most interested in addressing power imbalances in organisations, and the greater the power imbalance, the highest risk of abuse in one way or another. So whether that's around diversity and inclusion, whether it's around sexual harassment and intimidation, bullying, violence at work, and so the greater that risk, the more vulnerable people are. So obviously there are certain sectors that are at a higher risk in terms of modern slavery. There are certain types of people, in particular, maybe English as second language, migrant workers, temporary workers, seasonal workers. And so if we can give those parties, those peoples, a meaningful voice in what's really going on to inform policy decisions, investment decisions, what government does, but starting at its heart, letting the leaders in those organisations know about what's really going on, then you can make this wonderful improvement. What strikes me is that we often think around, we find out that's compliance, it'll be negative, and a sort of a trade-off between worker well-being and productivity and profitability. The opposite is true. Mm-hmm. If you put worker well-being at the heart and make it central, and you value and respect those people, the productivity and ROI, return on investment, mm-hmm. is huge. So we evangelize about that. We make no apologies. We think the greatest thing we need to change is our mindset.
Yeah.
And what is happening now is technology is catching up and allowing things to happen at an organisation, at a sector level, at a countrywide level, at a global level that hasn't been able to be done before.
Yes.
And at its heart, we've never really had a robust way for ethical employers to be able to know that they're ethical and be able to prove it.
Yeah.
So if you have a look at pressures on organisation, legislation, mm-hmm. consumers, NGOs, purchasers, they're basically saying, how do you know that you're an ethical employer, and how can you prove it? And now there is solutions, and that's the wonder and the magic of technology, of being able to do something that hasn't been done before at scale and in an efficient, real-time way.
Are there certain industries that are more receptive than others, for example, or conversely, are there sectors that have more, I suppose, more pushback in terms of the kind of work that you and the kind of service that you offer?
Yeah, we've started primarily in the area around horticulture and the high risk and the business migrants. Australia and New Zealand, it's called the RSE, the Recognised Seasonal Employers. Mm-hmm. In Australia, obviously, it's the PALM program, the Pacific Island Labour Mobility. We've now got governments, Pacific Island governments, saying we're hearing stories and we have examples of exploitation and abuse. We're not going to let our people come to New Zealand. We're not going to let them come to Australia until you can prove to us that you've got systems to identify and remedy. You've got systems to predict and prevent exploitation, and you've got systems to improve worker well-being. So I think there's an immediate demand there, driven by commercial drivers, less so than compliance and legislation.
Okay.
So those industries are interested. A lot of industries don't want to lift up the rock and find out what's happening. And putting your head in the sand is fine. Well, it's not. There's a great phrase, it's a legal term called willful blindness. And willful blindness says, if you could know, and you should know,
and you can know,
you have to.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, then you are legally responsible. And so again, I think there's this mindset shift outside of compliance, outside of what's required. It's morally and ethically the right thing to do, Stu.
Yeah. No, I completely concur. So, and it's encouraging to know that Islander governments are in particular interested to know and interested to see what measures are being put in place in countries, in the receiving countries like Australia and New Zealand, to actually protect their own people. That's fantastic, and it's good to have that. That the pressure to do the right thing is coming from a multi-stakeholder approach. It's not just, for example, concerned NGOs or human rights groups here raising the alarm. It's actually it's good to know that there are governments in other parts, particularly in the Pacific, that are also saying, actually, no, we want to know too, and we want to make sure that our people are protected when they come for the fruit picking season, for example. So that's really important. Right. Well, I mean, today, we're considering especially approaches to addressing modern slavery compliance, and one of the traditional paths to compliance has been through the analysis of international data sets to formulate a heat map, for example, to see and to determine, at least at a high level, where the risk of modern slavery lies. Could you maybe articulate how Ask Your Team could add value to the whole modern slavery compliance piece and really help, I suppose, in this tricky area, complex area called due diligence that many companies are in a sense struggling to step into? How do we actually do due diligence, and then perhaps how could Ask Your Team contribute to that?
Sure, look, great question. There's a Maori proverb which says, to achieve greatness, you stand on the shoulders of giants. You leverage the past and what's gone before you. And I think in this area around social audits, so self-assessments, high-level risk assessment by country and industry, that has been fantastic in terms of starting that journey, of creating awareness and the conversation about what we need to do and what we can do. What we see is the Ask Your Team, the worker wellbeing due diligence system, as being the next evolution. And what it does is it gets into a granular ability to really look at what's happening in a sector. Traditional social audits, a point in time survey of a very small number of people is great, but it's a snapshot and a point of time.
Yep.
So the Ask Your Team system, we talk about positively disrupting the space in terms of the next evolution, because what it does is it gives every single worker a safe, anonymous, online way of having a meaningful voice anytime, anyhow, anywhere. So one of the analogies that people have described it as, it moves from a snapshot, a Polaroid point in time, to a movie that's always going, where everybody has a role. And by the way, it's a speaking part, so you get a meaningful voice. So that granularity creates a level of due diligence and integrity about what's going on. And one of the things that the world has struggled with is, how do you actually know and how can you prove it that you're an ethical employer? So once you can do that, then that opens up the ability for all sorts of parties to recognise and will reward the best players.
Yes, that's right.
So you've got investors, and banks now are saying we need to know who are ethical employers, but we need to be able to have real integrity around that. So we've just, for example, worked with one of the primary sectors here in New Zealand, 1,000 odd migrant workers. Overall, the results are fantastic, but because every worker's got a voice, in this case, it's been able to identify 59 examples of issues at the extreme, getting towards the extreme end.
Yep.
And now those organisations are addressing that. That simply wouldn't get picked up.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Sample face-to-face interview. Those organisations are taking action on that, but it's also uncovered literally a gold mine of gold nuggets on how those organisations can make productivity improvements. So they've got feedback on rosters, how they're picking, how they're operating to improve the business, health and safety issues, what equipment. So the whole gambit. But at its heart is once you've got a really effective means of proving who's an ethical employer, then that opens up a raft of myriad of opportunities for the organisation to generate value and to have other parties confer value on that organisation.
Perfect. Well, let's take a look. I know that you've got some slides, a bit of a demo, a bit of show and tell. Let's, as beautiful as we are in terms of our faces, let's present, see what this actually looks like.
So, as you mentioned, this is just a few snapshots of the online screen on the online system, which is available in real time and instantaneously. So what happens is that workers receive a survey, and the questions are based around the UNGP, the International Labour Organization, and OECD guidelines. So there's a range of questions. The workers can take that on a laptop, any smart device. We have organisations that run a kiosk system, which is making devices available at a particular time. The system is translated into about 17 languages. So if English isn't your first language, then the ability to take the survey and anonymity for every individual is guaranteed. Organisations get all the granular information that they want, and they can take examples. So this is a report that would show these are the different categories over here. There's a number of questions under each of those categories, but immediately, and this is the range of questions, you can see where some of the issues are that you might want to be dialing into in terms of granularity. This is breaking one of those categories down. So here's the category, health and safety. These are the questions. And these demographics here can be orchards, can be supervisors, can be factories, can be work groups, anything that's set up in the system. So that these heat maps allow you to laser-like and almost like an MRI to say, hey, do we have systemic issues or do we have issues in a particular area? So, for example, one of the entities that we've recently been involved with, 17 orchards, fantastic results across the organisation, 15 of the orchards, amazing results, but 2 absolute outliers with serious issues at a supervisory level, and one that they ended up finding out was worker-to-worker violence and abuse. So you can quickly see with the information what to focus on. You've got the ability to measure progress over time. So the ASCII team system, the due diligence system, it's unlimited use. So you can use all of it as often as you want, parts of it for particular areas. So you might identify an issue, co-design solutions, and then check in real time. So identify and remedy, predict and prevent, and then being able to prove to parties. This is the management, the action management system that goes with it. And so this is important. What we're seeing, we're talking to some major overseas retailers and global retailers who are saying, we're not expecting perfection in our supply chains, but we want transparency, and we want to see proof of action and change being taken.
Yep.
So that trend, there was a great phrase the other day, transparency is your shield. Transparency is your shield. If you've got a robust way of finding out what's happening, identify and remedy. So that's just a very quick snapshot of how it looks. So online, instantaneous, real time, amazing analytics, take examples. And what we do for sectors is we then aggregate that information up, anonymise that. So for example, the New Zealand government at our RSE conference next week, we're presenting that aggregated information with the Hort sector and the labour hire sector, saying we're taking this approach as a sector so that we can put our hands on our hearts and saying the sector may not be perfect, but we've got the most robust due diligence program in the world. And for us, that definition of due diligence, Stephen, is that identify and remedy, predict and then be able to prove.
Perfect, great. So, I've noticed. I know you just mentioned earlier that it's available in up to 17 languages. Which is fantastic. I'm curious as to understand maybe some of the not necessarily limitations, but maybe some challenges when it comes around cross-cultural dynamics in terms of how people respond to a survey from a cultural perspective, for example. And I'm also interested in thinking through around maybe accessibility for those who may not be literate enough to read questions and comprehend and answer effectively. What, can maybe speak to that, and what kind of things have come up for you from a cross-cultural and also a cross-ability, a diverse ability perspective?
Yeah, look, really good questions. The translations help in the various languages. So sometimes the organisations have translators to assist, maybe even read the questions out. Because it's the smiley face or the angry face, if the question's read out, the person can still answer that anonymously, even without literacy. We do see big differences between cultures in terms of, do you give feedback about your boss in terms of hierarchies?
Exactly, yes.
So we can look at the differences between ethnicities to see whether there's other trends. We've also had feedback that in some cultures where we're asking for questions on a degree, that they don't have that grey. So it's black or white, it's a yes or no. So we're continuing to adapt and learn from that and evolve that. We're also looking at, from a disability point of view, verbal questions. So we'll be able to take it audio. So lots of things coming up to continue to evolve and improve that.
Sure. And I suppose another question has to do with, it seems that most of the work to date has been done with groups of people working in New Zealand, for example, or perhaps in some of the islands. As you look to expand and move, say, into Asia, for example, not that I'm saying you should do that, but just as an example, and you start thinking about moving from, say, agriculture into factories, I suppose the question is, how do you How do you see this working in contexts where there might be more restrictions on employees in factories being able to access some sort of worker voice application?
We've just recently had Kathmandu, which is an iconic Kiwi clothing company, run the system in some of its Chinese factories.
Right.
And with huge success, they are now looking to roll it out to a larger group of factories and some other clothing brands. We've also got some other iconic Kiwi clothing companies that are looking to, off the back of that. That has come with some other challenges that we're learning from that. But the principle seems to be staggeringly similar, and the response rates and the participation rates. And what we find is that both the participation rate and the level of honesty, and particularly in the free text questions, where often a lot of the insights are, that grows over time. When people get trust, then they see actions happening, and no one being victimised, or there's no retaliation or retribution. That will grow and increase. So already in that case, some of the other clothing brands are saying, hey, look, we want to run this. And the workers are saying already, hey, it's great. They've made some changes within 2 weeks. So we believe over time, and then there'll be improvements that we continue to make for it, but we see it being fundamentally applicable just about anywhere. The principle is the same: a safe, anonymous way. Every worker gets a voice. You find out as much as possible. May not be perfect, but we believe it's infinitely more powerful than anything else in terms of being able to truly identify those toxic pockets.
I mean, one of the weaknesses one of the gaps that has been seen in the corporate response, the corporate approach, to the Modern Slavery Act and particularly the criteria around the legislation here, and there's Commonwealth guidelines and guidance for that, is around remedy, providing appropriate remedy should cases of modern slavery exist. It seems to me from what Ask Your Team offers is more not so much, well, it obviously would help to identify some of the low-hanging fruit, would you say, and of things that perhaps an organisation at the top end of the supply chain could consider around, well, this is the immediate experience of these people working. These are the kinds of things that we could work in collaboration with the factory or the suppliers to actually put in some better systems or structures or facilities or amenities to actually make the work environment much more pleasurable, much more dignified. Would you see that as that being the case? And then in many ways, it seems to me it would act as a preventative measure. There's a way of taking action before anything develops as well.
Yeah, well, that concept of predict and prevent, what you see with the system and the results, you can see outliers in terms of particular factories or workers or industries. You can also see if scores are declining. So these are really good indicators of why we need to delve deeper. We need to look more into what's going on. So that ability, the identify and remedy is actually the ambulance at the cliff. So the continuous involvement process is really important. What we're seeing already happening manually, for example, today in Hawke's Bay, we had 10 of the major Apple companies in the country getting together, doing a workshop on the results of their, and sharing their results and coming up with ideas and solutions. So we're actually going to build some of that into suggested actions into the system. But what it does is a lot of the things that get identified, it's the questions are so specific and the analytics are so specific, you can self-remedy a lot of those.
Yes.
Where you need expertise, it might be, hey, look, this is at the extreme end. We need a formal investigation. Almost there's criminal behaviour going we'll do that. Or we need advice on policies and procedures. What it does do, you either self-remedy or you know exactly what it is that you want done, where and when, to get third-party help and then have the ability to measure the impact on that. So everything about the Ask Your Team system is around getting results. It's not just about compliance. It's not just about measuring. The whole system and the DNA is making a difference and making a change. So individual organisations and then collectively working together, sectors working together on making a difference for worker wellbeing and being able to measure and prove it.
So the platform therefore has a capacity for consortium level engagement where different organizations, peers can actually work together, as you mentioned before, with Apple, the Apple organizations, to actually share their results, share their experience, and collaborate, which is exactly what we need to see happen on so many levels. So,
and one of the things again about adding value, if you have a look at what consumers are demanding around the world, they want authenticity and transparency. And so in some ways, by not trying to hide stuff, by not trying to sweep it under the carpet, you can actually get more trust and value for your organisation by saying, hey, we are doing this. We are identifying things. We are taking preventative action. The other thing that we've found in some of the feedback is, I was taught when I was at Citi, running there, they were saying, hey, when fraud happens, there's three reasons. You create the opportunity, and then people see the opportunity, but then they're motivated, and then they rationalise it. But if fraud happens, that's you as the CEO, you've created that opportunity. So if we put in a system that is so much more robust than anything that's happening before, you, by default, you are automatically having a huge impact on people being tempted to behave badly. It's sort of like if there's CCTV cameras up everywhere, you might not go and steal that packet of crisps at the supermarket. Not that I'd ever accuse you of stealing crisps. So it does that prevention just because of the robustness of the system. Hey, I'm going to get found out. If I'm extorting, if I'm demanding money, all I need is one person to be saying this, and so
So what then are the possibilities for Ask Your Team? What are the possibilities, and perhaps what's the future? Where do you see Ask Your Team going?
We want to be, there's a number of accreditation programs around the world in the CSG space. We want to be the S in the ESG program. We want to be the very best in the world at that social component or the people component, the worker wellbeing. And if we can do that, what it does is it creates this incredible opportunity to have a common language or a common measurement. And when you have that, you've got the ability for people to make meaningful comparisons. So if I'm in a supermarket and there's 3 banana providers, if they're all using a worker wellbeing due diligence, I can compare the scores. I can make my choice. I can make my choice on fashion. I can make my choice as a consumer. As I mentioned before, investors and banks are now looking at potential preferential treatment for those in terms of interest rates and credit and those sorts of things for those that can prove that they're ethical employers.
Yep.
So we can bring a whole ecosystem of recognition and reward. And I think actually, if we want to really eradicate slavery, then harnessing natural economic forces that recognise and reward the good employers and the bad guys self-exclude, that you'll actually achieve more with that on a sustainable way than you ever will get with legislation. Punitive legislation. Now, we are fully in support of the legislation, and that's a fantastic start. But imagine if we could layer, magic of the and, if we could layer on top of that commercial reward and recognition. So in New Zealand, with the government, with the migrant workers, they're talking about saying, hey, only organisations that have got a worker wellbeing due diligence program are going to be eligible for those extra migrant workers. You can only be eligible for government contracts. For example, the cleaning industry is high risk. Yet at the minute, government contracts here in New Zealand go to the lowest cost provider.
Yes, exactly.
So you run the risk of actually contributing to the problem.
Yes, exactly. I think for me, when it comes to modern slavery risk, I think, we do, modern slavery is used as an umbrella term from a legislative perspective to encompass a range of human rights violations of a particular strand, if you like, of a commercial transactional nature. I think it would be this kind of tool could also be helpful in actually identifying very clearly what are some of those distinctions around forced labor and debt bondage and domestic servitude and trafficking, and to see, and perhaps how those different faces of modern slavery intersect and interplay, and what, for example, leads from one to the other, for example. I think that would be of great interest. I kind of also thought, and I don't want to, push that into you, but I also saw maybe application in the environmental space as well, particularly from a stakeholder-based approach, where, particularly around waste, the management of waste or air quality or pollution from a factory, to actually just have that additional perspective from those working, the employees, in terms of, them asking them questions. Okay, well, yeah, where do you see the runoff into the river? Or where do you see the dumping of the waste? Those kind of things. So they actually could, as an addition to other checks and balances that go on environmentally, also contribute to the environmental space.
I think that's a brilliant idea, and no, we hadn't thought about it.
Oh, there you go. Well, I'll send you my invoice.
we will now. But look, you did right. In New Zealand, in Australia, there was the Royal Commission, the Hayne Report into Financial Services, about banks and organisations selling customers things that they couldn't afford or shouldn't have, and yet I went to the New Zealand Australia Business Council thing a couple of years ago, 18 months ago, and the bank said, "Oh, we've made all these changes," and then everyone said, "Well, how do you know? How can you prove it?" So we've actually developed up a financial code of conduct thing, which we're operating here in New Zealand, which does exactly what you're talking about, Stephen, in a different context. It's actually, rather than listen to the CEOs, who would ever trust the CEO? You actually go to the people and at front and say, are you selling products and services? Are you being incentivized? Are you being pressured to sell in targets and things like that? So I think, as you're saying, as another check and balance, those at the coalface getting their safe, anonymous feedback on what's happening, it could be incredibly powerful in terms of giving integrity to that. So
I think, and then probably on the G, I can give you some ideas on the G side. So I think on the G side, you could actually do a shareholder or a board of director due diligence piece of actually getting understanding the minds of shareholders or boards, or even the effectiveness of policies and that are put in place, and the socialization of those policies, for example. All those things that go into governance could also, I could see potential application there as well. So.
And one of the things with this aggregation, when you roll that up, you're getting better information, and you hit the nail on the head again earlier with your discussion around research. So individual organisations running this, creating an ecosystem that recognises and rewards the best performers, but then we can aggregate that information up and give it to governments to make better policy and measure the progress of policy or investments or changes. Our T-shirt that we normally wear, but this is a formal occasion today, clearly, our corporate T-shirt just simply says, "Don't guess." Right. And this is, you ask your team.
Well, so as long as it's sustainably sourced, it's okay. I'm going to put it out. Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to put it out there to those who are listening in today. There's an opportunity now, if you'd like to ask questions. If you've got any questions for Chris, especially around the work of Ask Your Team, please, we invite you to put those questions in the chat. Because it seems to me that Chris and I could probably just keep on talking. So I just wanted to just pause there to give you an opportunity to put in your questions if you have any. So nothing has come in quite yet, but anyway, we can wait a little bit. I suppose, Chris, as we're going to be wrapping up very soon. I suppose what are some key takeaways for business? For people in business, for people, and even for individuals, for individual workers? What are some key takeaways from your perspective?
I think for me, morally and ethically, outside of anything else, we need to be making change. And we can demand change, and we can do things that we've never been able to do before in technology. So as an individual consumer, you can start to bring pressure to bear. If you're an NGO, your ability to influence policy and say, hey, look, what we can do now in terms of due diligence, we can let technology do all the heavy lifting, give every worker a voice, and then look, we'll use social auditors to go in where there's red lights. So there's ways. One of the things we hear about with the growth in due diligence, there's not enough social auditors. Well, that's assuming you're going to do things the same old way. So why not let technology give every worker a voice, and then use those wonderful social auditors to go and dive deeper where there's some warning systems. So a different mindset, what can be done, and how do we add value, and how do we look to recognise and reward the really good employers? And if we get that ecosystem going, the bad guys will just be self-exclude. And that's where I think the real power is, Stephen.
Yeah, I think for me, just it's all about the dignity piece, about just circling back to how we originally started the conversation about the priority here is to restore dignity and to gain insights into what people are thinking, how they see things, how they think a problem can be solved. Can go a long way, and getting their input goes a long way towards increased productivity, sense of purpose, that they're actually contributing to something. It's not just a ways to make money. They're actually part of something that's bigger than themselves, that gives them a challenge and a reason to get up in the morning. There's a sense in which they're not just a number in an organization, but they have a voice, and they can use that voice creatively. And that answers to problems that can come from all sorts of people, even in those who we assume that it may not come from. So, and to be open to that, to be open to drawing insights from a range of stakeholders associated with your organization.
Yeah, I totally agree. Value and respect, meaningful involvement. And you'll be just staggered, as my parents showed me, what people will do with self-belief and a sense of belonging. Yeah. And they really are our greatest asset, and they're our colleagues, they're our peers. We need to treat them like that.
Well, Chris, there are no questions. So I think you've actually nailed everything on the head, and articulated everything amazingly. There are ways, though, that people can continue the conversation with you. Let me do my little maneuver. People can reach out to you at Ask Your Team if they've got any further questions. And I know that you can also make available, and we can provide a link to that PDF, that presentation that you showed. You can make that available to people. I know also you have a short presentation that's available through the website, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. And there's a 4.5-minute video which explains around the ethical voice worker wellbeing due diligence platform.
Yep. Yeah, we just encourage you, if you're part of an organisation, or you're in management, or in the executive, and you really see that that Ask Your Team would contribute greatly to your organisation, we encourage you to reach out to Chris and his team. They'd love to speak with you about how they can help you. And it may not specifically have to do with modern slavery risk. It could have to do with a whole range of different types of research that you might want to conduct to better understand what's going on in your organization, what's going on around your suppliers and your stakeholders in your entire value chain to strengthen your organization and its purpose and work in the world. So we want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Chris, for presenting today and for your time for the Unchaining Modern Slavery webinar. If you'd like to connect with Chris, you can. If you want to connect with me, you can as well. My details are at the bottom, and you should all be familiar with the QR code system. So if you press onto that, or whatever there is, scan that. That's the word I'm looking for. If you scan that, that'll take you to all my socials, and you can connect with me further. We'd love to talk with you about how we can help you address the issue of modern slavery, both as a consumer, but also, but more especially as a business as well. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. It's been an honour. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for your great ideas, Stephen.
No problem, brother. Very happy to talk further, and look forward to partnering with Ask Your Team into the future.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for everyone's investment of time. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.